Now, there is renewed concern and speculation in Nigeria about plans at the National Assembly to tighten two media laws, the Nigeria Press Council Act and the National Broadcasting Commission Act. The move is being seen by many as an infringement of press freedom and the right to freedom of speech, and yet another example of the Nigerian government's intolerance to criticism, even though the bill has not been sponsored by the administration. The amendments propose punitive measures against media organizations and practitioners for any violation of the press code without reference to the courts. Recently, the Nigerian government banned the microblogging site Twitter in Nigeria on what many see as flimsy excuses, a move that's attracted widespread criticism both inside and outside Nigeria. Well, to assess the outcry in Nigeria against these two bills, I'm joined now in the studio by Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, Dr. Mahmud Jega, and by the former editor of the Nigerian Pilot newspaper and facilitator at the National Open University of Nigeria, Dr. Austin Maho. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
And I'll start with you, Dr. Jega. We have an idea of how these bills were initiated, don't we? I mean, they're not executive bills, they're private members' bills.
They are, but that does not reduce the gravity of the situation, because what the bills seek to do accords with the feelings of the executive branch of government as repeatedly expressed in the last few years and months. But basically the substance of the bills goes for a solution where there is no problem, because the main issue that the Minister of Information had been harping on in the last few years was the issue of fake news and hate speech, which essentially was a social media problem. The mainstream print media and the mainstream electronic media in Nigeria, they have their problems, and people take them to court every day where they infringe on personal and individual liberties. But the newer phenomena of fake news and hate speech are essentially in the social media, because that one is not regulated by experts. But these two bills seeking amendments to the Press Council Act and the National Broadcasting Commission Act go to the heart of the media, the mainstream print media and the mainstream electronic media, not so much even the social media where most of the observed problems are resident right now.
That's a good way of setting it out. Let me come to you, Dr. Maho. What do you think is the motivation behind the introduction of these bills?
Obviously, the motivation is simple, is to gag the press, is to ensure that the government, those who criticizes the government, you know, they resort to self-censorship. Where you have a media, all the various media from whether print, there's an assault on the media on all fronts, print, electronics, social media. These are constitutionally guaranteed medium of expressing your freedom of expression, as guaranteed in Section 39 of the Constitution. And if you even look at Section 22 of the Constitution, it said the press and other agencies of mass communication shall at all times monitor government on behalf of the people.
Yeah, but that's also superseded by other sections of the Constitution that say that the government has a responsibility to act if there are issues of national security under threat.
What is under threat now? Is that the issue? You know, when a government wants to be clever in application of the law or selective application of the law, you can always use national security concerns to gag the media. But in this situation, there's no threat whatsoever. The only threat, the only person who feels threatened, unfortunately, is the government, is the President Buhari's government, who, because what we are having now is like a ripple effect. And we know where it began when Twitter pulled down the post of the president. Before now, there was nothing, although it was there, but it is not as pronounced as it is now, where you now have a situation whereby the free media is being seems to be assaulted on all fronts. You are seeking an amendment to the NBC Act. You are seeking an amendment to the NPC Act. You are seeking an amendment to the Electoral Act, which guides election reportage. And all is targeted at the media, how they do their job. So when you say, to come to your question, when you say there are provisions that guarantees or protects national security, this has nothing to do with national security concerns. National security concerns is not the motivation for this. So the timing, in essence, the timing for all this is suspicious. So that's the concern of anybody. Right. Nobody is saying that, you know, when you look at, you know, the leverage the social media is gaining as a means of expression and the rise of fake news and various concerns, nobody is saying that there's a need for there to be a kind of regulation. Right. But the timing is wrong. And the attempt to legislate free speech through legislation, to regulate free speech through legislation is wrong.
Well, that's an interesting point. And Dr. Jega, we've heard a lot from the executive and their stated aim to further tighten regulation, as he pointed out. I mean, it's something that they've said on different occasions about different aspects of the media. And of course, we've seen a lot going on with the suspension of Twitter, which clearly shows us that they're not messing around. I mean, they're pretty serious about what they want to do. In that environment, surely the people who are saying that the press who are wary at the moment are justified in their wariness.
Yeah, well, the recent suspension of Twitter has made these attempts to amend the laws quite untimely, because people will inevitably link the two processes, even though they are totally different processes. The government in Nigeria cannot say that it has not received a fair hearing from the mainstream print and the electronic and even online media. I mean, in fact, many people think the government received too much hearing in the local media. All kinds of government officials are speaking every day and saying all kinds of things. Actually, it is probably the balancing act, getting the other side of the story, that is actually weak in the Nigerian press environment. But otherwise, this is not the time, because one cannot see the need or the imperative to say that the print media must be registered with the Nigeria Press Council before anyone can maintain. Now that defeats the whole idea, the constitutional provision that anyone is free to operate a medium that disseminates information and their ideas. In any case, every media company, just like every other company, must be registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission.
Absolutely.
And once you register there, then you pay your taxes, you do other things. The ideas, you express them, they are edited and monitored by real media professionals. But of course, every now and then there is a failing, and where there is a failing, the courts are also there. I don't think there is any single day in Nigeria where there is no ongoing libel or slander.
So you've already got libel and slander laws and that sort of thing.
And the laws are very effective, and the courts are serious about that. So what is the aim now of saying the company must, a media outlet must register with the Press Commission, and then you bring all kinds of penalties that if they do this? The courts are already doing that quite satisfactorily.
So what is your sense of the implications of this going forward? Because clearly it's going to pit the press against the government. It's going to be a very adversarial role. And in the final analysis, it would be, wouldn't it, to the detriment of the government?
Yes, it is. The government at the center, the APC government as it is now, should not forget the fact that they are coming into power is a result of free speech, which the media endears. It is the media that brought the current administration to power, because it was able to highlight the fault, the deficiencies of the administration it took over from. So to now be using the instrument of state, irrespective of constitutional provision, we should not forget, in all of this, I always want to refer back to Section 39 of the Constitution that guarantees freedom of expression and freedom of the means to exercise your freedom of expression, which is radio, television, and as it were right now, the social media. Any law, invariably any law that is inconsistent with the provision of Section 39 is not law. And when you talk about many Nigerians who tend to want to defend what the federal government is doing, don't understand the impact of living in a democratic government. The only thing that makes a democratic government different from an authoritarian government is freedom of expression, nothing else. That is why freedom of expression is the first thing when an authoritarian government comes into power. The first thing it does is to clamp down on freedom of expression. So the government of the day should be very careful, because the implication is that we are moving into authoritarianism, where the government doesn't want to brook any opposition. Opposition help. When people criticize you constructively, it helps you one way or the other
to improve on governance
and what the press
and do your work more efficiently.
And what the press is doing is in line with constitutional provision.
Okay,
we'll take a break accountable to the people.
We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll keep chatting. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about two media bills before the Nigerian National Assembly that many fear will infringe upon press freedom in the country. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, there's been a sustained rise in the criticism leveled against two bills at the House of Representatives that aim to amend the Nigerian Press Council Act and the National Broadcasting Commission Act. In spite of the fact that the Nigerian government has made it clear that, contrary to prevailing speculation, it's not the sponsor of the bills, but that the move has come via a private member, fears of a clampdown on free speech have continued to trail the bills. It certainly hasn't helped that the Nigerian Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, turned up at the House and not only defended the sponsor, but added that social media, which is not part of the bills, should be included. His appearance has only served to deepen speculation that the government is at least comfortable with the attempt to tighten the screws on the media. And with me in the studio, Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, Dr. Mahmud Jega, and the former editor of the Nigerian Pilot newspaper and facilitator at the National Open University of Nigeria, Dr. Austin Maho. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us.
Thank you.
So how perilous, Dr. Jega, does all this make the future of the press in Nigeria and the whole idea of press freedom in this country?
Well, at the beginning, you know, it indicates that the members who introduced this private members' bills do not have an appreciation of the centrality of freedom of speech and the free press in having a vibrant democracy or any liberal democracy at all. Because actually what we need in Nigeria, we have been saying that the Nigerian press is relatively vibrant by African standards. But it has many shortcomings to do with the capacity. The business environment is not very good because it will need a strong business base in order to be able to hire better hands, have continuous training, have better facilities. And also the facilities are very expensive. I mean, all the newspapers in Nigeria rely on imported newsprint from Brazil and other places. It shouldn't be like that. So if only we have greater capacity of the media to hire professionals, then many of the observed problems of the moment would have been taken care of. Probably there will still be a problem with the social media because of the lack of professional control there, and that one we can look at some means to be able to check that. But these two bills go for a solution where there is no problem. Otherwise, there is a general healthy equilibrium in Nigerian society between the conduct of media professionals and the interests of the general society.
Right, and Dr. Maho, Dr. Jega there was talking about the many years of dystopian media, if you like, under the military and subsequently in Nigeria. Do you think this is just a temporary blip? Because, I mean, it's still a bill. It's going through the motions of the National Assembly, and it may well not go through. I mean, you know, do these new proposed laws, if they're passed, I mean what for the press? I mean, I know we've touched on it briefly, but I mean, are we looking at a bleak future? Is that going to become the absolute default of these laws?
I understand what you're trying to say. I've taken my time to examine some of the contentious provisions of the bill. If passed into law, it will be like a hammer seeking a nail, because it's like a trap, especially for the broadcast media. It's like a trap where you have provisions. And when you look at the NBC Act, for instance, one of the contention that stakeholders in the broadcast media have always had with the NBC Act is because it is controlled 100% by the federal government. You have a minister who has the power to propose amendment to a bill that is designed to regulate you. If you look at the way the media operates, vis-a-vis Section 22 of the Constitution, press, other means of mass communication to monitor government on behalf of the government, there's bound to be conflict.
Absolutely.
If I'm monitoring you on behalf of the people, so the press is actually like an arbiter. You are standing between the government and the people. How do you now want to put the power of regulation in the hand of somebody I'm supposed to monitor on behalf of the people?
That's a very good point.
It removes my independence, because you are an interested party.
Absolutely.
And you are now giving the power to regulate me. So at the end of the day, what I'm forced to do is to resort to self-censorship. And if you look at the NBC Act, for instance, and you look at most of the punitive measures they've put in place over time in terms of regulating the broadcast media, there's no appeal. If NBC, for instance, decide to sanction, penalize, place a fine on Arise TV, who do you appeal to? Who holds the power of appeal? So you now have a judge, and a judge who is interested in his own case, presiding over an issue of which he's supposed to play the role of an arbiter.
Yeah, but the argument has always been, though, and I'll come to Dr. Jega in a moment, the argument has always been that in whatever circumstances you find yourself, there isn't an ouster clause that says you can't go to court to challenge a decision that's taken against you. I mean, the courts are always there.
The courts are always there, but the provision, NBC Act, operates through a code, and that code has been given to you. The thing, irrespective of the outer clause, you are guided by those codes.
Right.
Who drafted those codes? Any decision that the court is going to be is going to take on any issue.
Because that's a very good point. Because the court's job is simply to interpret laws that are there. So what's likely to happen, Dr. Jega, is that the courts will simply say, we don't have jurisdiction over this, or the law is very clear.
Well,
I mean, this is what this is what the law says.
This is the code, but you know there are higher issues involved. For example, these amendments that are being thought to the Press Council Act and to the NBC Act would be challenged on constitutional grounds.
Yes.
One can go to court and say, well, the National Assembly passed this law. Probably the president
and it violates the Constitution. That's a very good point. But let me ask you this, because we've got a couple of minutes before we have to go. Is the press prepared for this fight with the government? Is it able to cope with this type of battle ahead, to stop this attempt to muzzle the media, or this perception of the attempt to muzzle the media from becoming law?
I think the Nigerian press has shown capacity over the years. For example, the Nigeria Press Council Act has been controversial for nearly 30 years now, since it was passed by military decree, I think in 1993. The council has been largely moribund because of objections by media professionals that this is not the model that we try to copy from the United Kingdom, for example, of media self-regulation. Instead, the government snatched the whole process and enacted a decree. So to that extent, I think the Nigerian media professionals are very, very capable of mounting a sustained fight across several administrations and generations.
And does this chime, Dr. Maho, with the public mood in this country? Is there sentiment with the government, the press, or they don't really care?
I think over time, irrespective of the fact that there's need for the press to be free, but over time, research has equally shown that there's trust deficit in the media, especially with the advent of the social media. The fact is there's need for regulation. But the problem is, where should that power of regulation lies? Should it be through legislation? As in, should it lie in the hands of the government through legislation, or what you call external regulation? Or should the media itself, or the various media platforms, should they come back and come together and institute a self-regulatory
Well, that's what the Press Council should have been doing, isn't it? Well,
but the Press Council itself is controversial to the extent, like Doctor was saying here, to the extent that if you look at the 9-member board, 5 are nominated by the federal government, and the executive secretary is nominated by the federal government. So it's still government control.
It's a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure it'll be quite comforting for the press in this era of claustrophobia if they feel that they have the support of the public. But Dr. Mahmud Jega, Dr. Austin Maho, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
You're watching.